Good morning. Again, today is Palm Sunday, marking the beginning of Holy Week, leading up to Good Friday and then Easter Sunday. Jesus came to change the world. But what strikes me is that he spent most of his time in Galilee, a rural area at the margins of society. Thinking about how to change the world, we tend to feel that those who have power and authority, in other words, those at the center of society, like the White House, Washington, or leaders of the world, need to be the ones who bring about the changes. Otherwise, there's nothing much we can do about it, we might feel. But remember that Jesus spent most of his time in Galilee, a rural area at the margins of society. Not because he did not have the chance to meet with those who were in power, but because he believed. He believed in the power of ordinary people like you and me. Kingdom movement, Jesus movement, starts from the periphery, from the margins of the world. From the ones who do not possess worldly powers, but the ones who live with prophetic imagination of the alternative world, where the goodness and faithfulness of God, His justice and mercy can be fully manifested. From the ordinary people like you and me who choose to live with hopeful imagination. Then, as the time comes, Jesus enters Jerusalem, the place of power, the center of power, Jerusalem. Jesus is not afraid of speaking the truth about the world's wrongs against the wrongdoers. The crowds shouted, "Hosanna," which means "Come and save us." "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Waving palm branches, a symbol of victory, laying their cloaks on the road, welcoming Jesus as a king. But only in a few days, their shouts changed from "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord" to "Crucify him, crucify him." And as they requested, Jesus was killed on the cross. Have you ever wondered why Jesus was killed? Yes, we think a lot about his atoning sacrifice, that he chose to die on our behalf because of our sins. That's a theological reason, theological explanation. But have you wondered why the people in the first century wanted and needed to kill Jesus? Why so suddenly? Why so quickly? They were so impatient that they were unable to wait for any more days nor weeks. They had to kill him within a handful of days. Why did they have to kill Jesus? If all Jesus did were to heal the sick, comfort those who mourn, and preach good and wise words from the Old Testament, there's no reason for them to want to and need to kill Jesus. There's no reason for them to persecute this good, godly person. Was it because Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, a blasphemy that led him to the cross? No. The gospel accounts state that on the Palm Sunday, they chanted, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord," freely and publicly acknowledging Jesus as the King. A dangerous political claim, but they still had expectations for him. But when Jesus started saying the uncomfortable truth against the ones in power and authority, when Jesus spoke against the Jerusalem temple authority, the center of Jewish power, the center of Jewish money and politics, when it drove out those who were buying and selling in the temple, overturning the tables of money changers, challenging their economic system. They immediately expressed discomfort, saying, "Tell us, by what authority you are doing this? Who gave you this authority?" Authority and power. People immediately reacted to this sensitive topic. "How dare you, Jesus? Now you are crossing the line," they said. Deeply feeling offended, they rushed themselves to the court and shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The revelation of Jesus Christ, the unveiling of reality through the eyes of Jesus. And today's passage also unveils what must be said about human powers and authorities. Today's passage unveils what must be said about our world when it opposes the justice and mercy of the one on the throne and the Lamb, the slain Lamb. We have studied the book of Revelation for a few weeks now, and we know by now how central the message of the cross is in understanding the message of Revelation. The cross of Christ, as depicted in chapter 5 in an image of a slain lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns, is at the center of Revelation's theology. This image of the slain lamb becomes a hermeneutical key or interpretive key to understanding the rest of the visions in the book, right? But have you noticed that the word cross never appears in the book of Revelation? The word cross never appears in the book of Revelation. It is not by accident, nor that the author forgot to mention the word. It's an intentional omission, and it is instead replaced by an image of a slain lamb, a lamb that is brutally slaughtered. So Revelation does not focus much on the sacrificial atonement aspect of the cross, in other words, atoning grace through the cross, but it rather focuses on the violence related to the cross, accusing violence in the world. Slain lamb, brutally, cruelly slaughtered lamb, an object of violence. And that's exactly what's going on in today's passage. John's Jesus is unveiling this uncomfortable reality, the reality of violence in the world. After the 777 visions of 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls, an angel of the Lord shows John another vision. Chapter 17, verse 1. "Come, I'll show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters." A vision of a great prostitute. And she, which must be a symbol, a sign referring to something else, will be punished. A message of judgment over the great prostitute. Fast forwarding, chapter 18 introduces another symbol. Another angel showed up, and with a mighty voice, he shouted, "Fallen! Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal." A vision of the great city of Babylon, this time an ancient city which remained mostly in ruins by the 1st century. And the vision is about judgment over this ancient city. These two visions are linked by the same descriptor, the word great. Great prostitute, Babylon the Great, meaning that these are complementary to each other, referring to the same object and same reality. A judgment is coming over something, And Jesus is going to show John the coming judgment using those two metaphors. Then who is the great prostitute? Who is Babylon the Great? And why? Why do they deserve the judgment? The great prostitute is sitting by many waters. It's a symbolic expression, and when the symbol is not straightforward, it comes with its own commentary. So verse 15, then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. What do the waters symbolize? People, multitudes, nations, and languages. Every corner of the world, four letters, every corner of the world. And she is sitting on it, meaning she's exercising her power and authority over the whole world, a great influence over others, over the nations. Not only that, this expression, living by many waters, appeared also in the Old Testament in the book of Jeremiah when proclaiming the oracles against the great city of Babylon. As you know, the Babylonian Empire in the time of Jeremiah was the greatest political force in the ancient Near East, exercising its power and authority over the surrounding nations. And this hints at the link between the metaphor of the great prostitute and the Babylon the Great. Then verse 4, this great prostitute was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She must be rich and enjoying luxury. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. It sounds like behind her luxurious look and lifestyle, there are filthy stories and behaviors. The description continues, verse 2. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. It's not only her, but she's corruptly influencing and leading other leaders of the world to do the same things that she is doing. Then who is she? You know by now, this refers to the Roman Empire in the first century context. This woman is said to be sitting on 7 hills, and it was a widely known fact back then that Rome was surrounded by 7 hills. Geographically speaking, it's surrounded by 7 hills. Politically speaking, it's exercising its corrupting influence on many other kings and people and nations of the world. Morally speaking, it boasts of its luxurious lifestyle, but there's a filthy story behind it. Roman Empire. This, in a sense, is a political satire in biblical apocalyptic language. But it's important to know that what is symbolized is not just Rome, but all the empires before and after Rome. So verse 12 talks about the 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, which refers to future Romes, future empires. Rome is just one in the series. There have been and will continue to be numerous Romes and empires who have done the same and will do the same. In the following chapter, the metaphor is changed to Babylon the Great. Babylon is an ancient empire, often known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which was defeated by the Persian Empire almost 600 years ago from the time John was writing this revelation. Then why does Revelation use the metaphor of Babylon instead of just saying Rome? Babylon and Rome have one very important thing in common, which no other nations in history share. Both Babylon and Rome had besieged Jerusalem and destroyed the Jerusalem temple. The first Jerusalem temple, often known as Solomon's temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and the second Jerusalem temple, which was rebuilt by Zerubbabel and later known as Herod's temple, because King Herod expanded the temple court drastically to buy the favor of the people. This second temple was destroyed by Rome in 70 AD. So Babylon was a perfect symbol to refer to Rome. It wasn't really a secret. We also find Apostle Peter referring to Rome as Babylon in his letter, which implies that this was a pretty common way to refer to their contemporary political force, Rome. However, besides this shared history, it is also true that Babylon has been a symbol of worldly power and opposition to God's kingdom throughout the Old Testament, a symbol of ungodly power and human arrogance. Against this ungodly power and political force, Jesus pronounces his judgment. Fallen is Babylon the Great. Fallen is Babylon the Great. One might argue back saying, but Rome, by the time John was writing this book, was still strong. Why was this written in a perfect tense, as if it's already complete and done? It's an eschatological statement in a sense of already but not yet. The coming of the judgment is so definite and can very quickly happen at any time. So in verse 10, Jesus says, in just 1 hour, your doom has come. You think your power and your kingdom might last forever? Its downfall will take less than an hour. From its peak to its doom, if Jesus swings his arm around it once, just once. Those in power, those in leadership must remember this statement from Jesus. It'll take less than an hour for any leader, any king, any president, any boss, anyone in power to be demoted and weep for their wrongs when Jesus unveils. Then we enter into the heart of this vision now. Why is Babylon judged? What are the reasons for its judgment? I want to introduce 4 reasons that this vision provides for the judgment over Babylon, Rome, human empires. All 4 reasons are important, but we will know soon that Jesus is particularly emphasizing one of them over others. The first reason for judgment on the Roman Empire, religious reason. As we have seen throughout the book of Revelation, the empire has abandoned its faith and fear of God and has worshipped human-made idols. Caesar dominus et Deus. It forced and misled its people to worship something that is not the living God. Not only that, it persecuted the followers of Jesus. Some had to lose their lives. Some had to be exiled because of their faith in the slain lamb. Some had to lose their jobs and be hated and shamed by their own neighbors. It has ridiculed the followers of Jesus and swallowed their dignity. Yes, the judge is patient because and as his followers are patiently enduring. But remember your fate. You will be judged for having left the living God out of the equation. There may be ungodly nations which look as if they are fine and prospering, but any nation that has left the living God will not last and is only subject to God's judgment in less than an hour. Thus says the Lord. The second reason for judgment on the Roman Empire, moral reason. While it boasted of its civilization, its moral corruption deepened. I'm going to name some of the awful moral corruption which may be sensitive for some of us to hear. It is argued that by the end of the first century, half of the population living in the city of Rome were slaves. Many of them were subject to sexual exploitation. Sexual license was common, especially among the elite. Prostitution, including temple prostitution, was legal and widespread. Adultery was tolerated or even expected for powerful men. The Roman ideal of masculinity often included dominance over others, including sexual dominance over both women and men or boys of lower status. In other words, pornography and sex trafficking were large industries within the empire as they pursued their own definition of hedonistic lifestyle. Is this a narrative that only applies to the past? Abortions and infanticide were common, especially for unwanted girls or infants with disabilities. And think about those gladiator games, animal abuse, and public executions, which were regarded as mass entertainment. The Roman Colosseum was built and completed under Emperor Titus in 80 AD, and it's only 1 year after its completion that Emperor Domitian stepped into the throne. Entertaining violence was at its manic peak in the time of Domitian. Such violence was wrapped and promoted as sport, and the people were numbed and blinded by their fandom and pleasure, not questioning the morality of it. A common characteristic of empires is that they seek new kinds of pleasure in their effort to escape pain, enhance pleasure, and transcend limits, often having to do with their physical bodies and instinctive desires. Opium, drug, and alcohol addictions were also an issue in the ancient world. Is this a story that only applies to the past? Moral reason. Third reason for judgment on the Roman Empire, political reason. Let alone the internal politics, which were full of conspiracies, assassinations, exiles, and mass firing of its officers during the time of Domitian. Let alone its abusive use of power over foreigners and less privileged classes. Rome's influence, corrupting influence over other nations became subject to Jesus' judgment on Rome. Rome, when it was given power and authority, was supposed to have given the Mediterranean world unity, stability, security, the conditions of prosperity. But instead, it was sitting over other nations, using its power to bully those weaker nations, those with weaker military and economic capabilities. The Lord says to Rome, by your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. Rome was bringing chaos rather than stability into the world. Instead of displaying and promoting its virtues, it was corruptly influencing others to fight against one another, promoting totalitarianism and dictatorship, seducing the nations with its decadence, power, entertainments, and false promises of security. Does religion have to be silent about politics? Revelation is not. Prophets were not silent. Jesus was not silent against the wrongs of the powerful, and that eventually led Jesus to the cross. The eternal judge is not silent and will not be silent about abuse of power and authority given by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And the fourth reason for judgment on the Roman Empire, economic reason. Surprisingly, if you skim through the whole chapter 18, which indicts Rome as the fallen nation, the fallen empire, you will find that the majority of the chapter has to do with economic exploitation of Rome. Richard Bauckham, an amazing New Testament scholar, says it straightforwardly: the focus of Jesus' indictment of Rome is her economic exploitation. Verse 11, the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over Babylon because no one buys their cargoes anymore, for Babylon has now fallen. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. And the list just goes on. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense. And at its extreme end, the trays included human beings sold as slaves, treating other humans only as a commodity for our economic activity. The empire brought in the most delicious fruits and food of the earth as well, from agricultural to luxuries. So a second century historian orator, Aelius Aristides, once said, if someone should wish to view all these things of the world, he must either see them by traveling over the whole world or be in the city of Rome. Both chapters 17 and 18 are full of Old Testament references to Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, which come from their oracles not only to Babylon, but mostly to the city of Tyre. For example, Isaiah 23 accuses Tyre for its exploitative trade deals and economic bullying over other nations. And the Lord calls him a prostitute, just like Revelation does, accusing its decadent lifestyle and pursuit for prosperity at the cost of disregarding the dignities of other nations and people. And the Lord says to Tyre, you think you're smart with those trade deals? You will never get it. When a powerful nation starts to misbehave only for its own benefit, the whole world shakes. So here's Jesus' bill of indictment. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. What's wrong with the luxuries that I get to enjoy when I can easily afford them, we might say? The Lord has blessed me with all these opportunities, we might have said to ourselves. But John's Jesus in Revelation is not so polite about that. He exposes the filth behind the sin, that the list of these luxuries could be enjoyed only by criminal disregard for the lives and dignities of very large numbers of other human beings. Growing up in churches, I heard numerous times that the reason that Israelites went into the exile to Babylon in the Old Testament was that they did not worship the God of Israel, namely because of a religious reason. While that is true, it is only a partial truth. It's only later in my life that I got to read the prophets properly, and they had a lot to say about the injustice and economic exploitation of the nation, which eventually led them to the exile. You know that the Bible is full of God's call for His people to justice. Since the very beginning, for example, in Genesis, God called Abraham and provided his reason for choosing him. I have chosen you, Abraham, so that you will direct your children and their family after them to keep the way of Yahweh by doing what is right and what is just. Those who knew Hebrew would better understand. These are Zedekiah and Mishpat, which refer to God's people's just living, life of justice based on God's compassionate love and care. So we are called to live justly. It is to participate in bringing about full prosperity and thriving of every creation, to do justly, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. But because God knows, because He knows that such a just life is so difficult, so challenging in a broken world like ours, He called us to pray. Pray, through which He will continue to remind us of His loving care and promises and empower us so that we could continue to live justly. But somewhere along the way, this sequence got flipped. And often we find so many Christians who do pray a lot, but have less interest in living justly. But hear the revelation of Jesus Christ. Fallen is Babylon the Great. What needs to be removed will be removed. Yes, that's what judgment is about. What needs to be removed will be removed. And what is eternal will remain eternal. It is the kingdom of Jesus where the slain lamb rules with mercy and justice. Each life, each soul, each humanity will be loved and respected, for they are made in the image of God. And our call is to find beauty in each person's face and to treat them with dignity for the sake of glory of the Father. Then what are we supposed to do? We are not the President of the United States. We do not have enough power and authority to bring about immediate changes to the systems and cultures of the world. What are we supposed to do? Today's passage makes a twofold call to followers of Jesus living in today's Babylon. Verse 4, hear the voice from heaven. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." The first call is to come out of Babylon, to run away from Babylon. But then, go where? Babylon is everywhere. Come out and go where? Obviously, this wasn't a call to leave the city of Rome geographically. None of the first century audience of this letter, Revelation, were living in Rome. They were living in Asia Minor. This command is for the readers to dissociate themselves from the patterns of the world. It is a command not to be in the company of those depicted mourning for Babylon's falling. The phrase, "come out of Babylon," is actually a familiar phrase. Israelites were living in the Egyptian empire, and God brought them out of Egypt. Exodus. Come out of Egypt. It wasn't just a geographic exodus, but also included a spiritual exodus from Egypt. An intentional practice of getting rid of the Egyptian patterns of thinking and living. So someone said, getting the people out of Egypt is easier than getting the Egypt out of the people. So it took over 40 years in the wilderness that the Israelites learned and practiced an alternative way of thinking and living, a life that is sensitive to God's provision and living by faith. Not by sight, but by faith. And one of the most important exercises that the wilderness students had to be trained in was a theology of enough. Theology of enough. Get out each day and gather enough for that day. The training was to gather just enough bread for our needs. In a world characterized by more and more, and bigger and bigger. The people of God are called to think about what is enough. This does not mean that we must therefore live with the bare minimum only. On the sixth day, the Israelites were to gather twice as much as they gather, saving for the future. It's a matter of wisdom to save and think about and plan for the future. Yes, we can enjoy. Yes, we must enjoy our lives. Yes, everything is permitted. Everything is given as gifts. But our freedom must not cause someone else's misfortune. Individual shalom is possible only when there's societal shalom. And societal shalom is possible only when there's individual shalom. While we enjoy abundance as the divine gift, we are also to practice self-limitation for the sake of others. Self-limitation for the sake of others through the practice of the theology of enough. Through the practice of intentional generosity, through the practice of relinquishing and not claiming my own ownership, through the practice of living for the common good over individual interest. That's how we could respond to the call of Jesus this morning. Come out of Babylon. Will you choose to come out of Babylon? And we can find the second call of Jesus in verse 20. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you. The second call of Jesus for his people living in Babylon is to rejoice. Yes, rejoice. We can rejoice when and only when we find Jesus in our midst. It's through the practice of prayer. Practice of prayer that we find and see Jesus in our midst eventually. Through prayer, and only through prayer, we are reminded how beloved we are in his embrace. Through prayer, and only through prayer, we are constantly reminded of our deeper reality and identity that is not to be recreated nor disguised by the luxuries we get to wear, but it's something that does not change because we remain connected to the Father who is all and has all. When the Father delights, we delight. That's how we get to rejoice. Rejoice, even in Babylon. That's how we get strength and power to live a day defiantly, even in Babylon. So please let me conclude with this one last simple question to you. Is Christ enough for you?